The forest lay far from towns, roads, and regular travel. It was the kind of place people stopped mentioning after a while, not because it was dangerous, but because there was nothing there that most people needed. No stores, no signals, no easy paths. Just trees that had stood longer than anyone remembered, and weather that followed its own rules. Few people chose to live nearby, and fewer stayed for long. The man had been there for decades. He was past the age of chasing excitement, past the years of testing himself against the unknown. He stayed because the land was familiar, and because familiarity mattered more to him than comfort. He knew how the seasons shifted, how the ground softened in spring and hardened again before winter. He knew where animals crossed and where water gathered. These were not things he learned from books or stories. They came from time and repetition. He did not go into the forest looking for answers. He went because it was part of his day, the same way others checked fences or watched the sky. His movements were careful but unremarkable. There was no sense of adventure in them, only habit. He paid attention to small signs, broken branches, changes in wind, tracks in the dirt, because they kept him safe. Nothing more stories about strange creatures had reached him over the years, as they did everyone who lived near deep woods. He never gave them much thought. Legends came and went, changing with the teller. Survival did not. What mattered was knowing when a storm was coming, how far he could travel before dark, and when it was time to turn back. Those were the truths that kept a man alive. The forest did not feel mysterious to him. It felt steady, quiet, honest. He trusted it because he understood it, or believed he did. And until that evening, there had been nothing to suggest that the land held anything. He had not already learned to live with the evening settled in the way it usually did. Without warning and without ceremony. Light faded slowly between the trees, and the forest took on the muted stillness that came before night. The man was finishing what he had come to do and preparing to head back, following the same route he had taken countless times before. Nothing about the moment felt different at first. Then, a sound moved through the trees. It was faint and carried unevenly, as if it struggled to travel far. It did not resemble the call of any animal he knew, and it lacked the sharpness of alarm or aggression. There was no force behind it. Instead, it wavered, rising and falling in a way that suggested effort rather than intent. It was the sound of something failing, not something advancing. He stopped walking. The forest around him grew unusually still, as though the normal background life had paused. Birds remained quiet. Even the wind seemed to thin out. He listened again, holding his breath without meaning to. The sound came once more, barely louder than before, strained and uneven, ending abruptly as if cut short. His first instinct was caution, not fear. Weak sounds could still lead to danger, especially at dusk. He stayed where he was for several seconds, letting his eyes adjust and his senses settle. The sound did not repeat immediately, but its absence felt heavier than its presence. When he finally moved, he did so slowly. Each step was placed with care, avoiding loose ground and dry branches. He did not call out. He did not rush. The forest was familiar enough to follow without haste, and whatever made the sound did not appear to be going anywhere. As he moved deeper between the trees, the feeling of stillness followed him. The sound came again, closer this time, no stronger than before. It confirmed what he already knew. This was not part of the forest's usual rhythm. Whatever it was, it did not belong. The sound led him to a small clearing where the trees thinned and the ground dipped slightly. What he saw there stopped him in place. Lying against the frozen earth was a massive figure, larger than any animal he had ever encountered in those woods. Her body was partly turned to the side, one arm drawn close as if in instinctive defense. Dark fur was pressed flat against the cold ground, matted in places where blood had soaked through. Her chest rose and fell unevenly. Each breath came shallow and delayed, as though it required effort to reach the surface. Aside from that slow movement, she was almost completely still. One leg lay at an unnatural angle, and deep marks crossed her side, injuries that were fresh and severe. Even without understanding their cause, the man knew they were fatal. Whatever had happened, it had already taken most of her strength. He did not need stories or imagination to know what she was. There was no room for confusion. She was real in the way suffering is real, unmistakable and immediate. Nothing about her presence felt exaggerated or unreal. She was flesh and bone, wounded and failing, her size only making the damage more obvious. The man remained where he was, his instincts pulling in opposite directions. Every lesson he had learned over the years warned him against approaching an injured animal, especially one of such size. Yet there was no sign of aggression in her posture. Her head rested against the ground, eyes half open but unfocused, as if the effort of seeing was already too much. Cold air settled around them. The forest remained quiet, almost respectful. He took in the scene slowly, aware that whatever choice he made next would carry weight. For the first time since he had followed the sound, uncertainty rooted him in place. He stood still, measuring distance, breath, and time, unsure whether stepping closer would help or make everything worse. It was then that he saw the smaller shape pressed against her chest. At first, it blended into the dark fur and shadows, but when it shifted, the movement was unmistakable. A Bigfoot infant clung tightly to the mother's body, its arms wrapped around her as if holding on could keep her there. The infant's head was tucked beneath her chin, face buried deep in her fur. The baby made a soft sound, barely more than a breath. It was not a cry meant to be heard across distance. It was close and restrained, the sound of something afraid to be alone. Each time the mother's breathing faltered, the infant pressed closer, as if responding to changes only it could sense. The mother stirred slightly, summoning what little strength remained. Her arms shifted, drawing the infant in tighter. The movement was slow and deliberate, protective even in weakness. She placed herself between the baby and the open space of the clearing, her body forming a barrier without thought or effort. The man felt his own breathing slow. He had seen animals protect their young before, but this was different. There was intention in it, awareness. The infant did not wander or explore. It did not cry out or attempt to flee. It stayed where it was, refusing to move, refusing to release its hold, even as the mother's strength continued to fade. He took a cautious step forward. The infant reacted immediately, lifting its head and fixing its gaze on him. There was fear there, but also resolve. It tightened its grip and pressed its body lower, as if willing itself to disappear into the mother's side. The man stopped. He understood then that the infant would not leave her, no matter what happened next. Hunger, cold, danger, it did not matter. The bond was absolute. The forest seemed to close in around the small family, quiet and unmoving. In that moment, the situation became clear. This was not an encounter driven by curiosity or chance. It was the final chapter of something already ending. And standing there, watching the infant cling to its dying mother, the man realized he was witnessing a kind of devotion that did not ask to be understood, only respected. The man did not move for several long moments. He stayed where he was, letting the scene settle in his mind without trying to shape it into meaning. The mother's breathing had grown slower, the pauses between each rise of her chest stretching longer than before. The infant remained pressed against her, unaware or unwilling to accept what was happening. He did not think in terms of bravery or fear. Those ideas felt distant and unhelpful. What mattered was time, and there was very little of it left. The cold alone would finish what the injuries had started. He could see it in the stiffness already forming in her limbs, in the way her body no longer adjusted to the ground beneath it. The infant, however, was alive and strong. Small, but alert. Its grip did not weaken. Its eyes followed every shift of movement the man made, watching closely, measuring him the way animals do when words are not an option. The man understood then that leaving was not a neutral choice. Walking away would mean the infant would stay, and staying would mean it would not survive the night. He lowered himself slightly, careful not to appear threatening. He did not reach out. He did not speak. There was nothing he could say that would change what was coming. Instead, he assessed the space around them, the distance to shelter, the falling temperature. His mind worked quietly, the way it always had in difficult moments. The decision formed without announcement. He would not interfere with the mother's final moments. But he would not abandon the living to the dead. It was not a promise or a plan, just a conclusion drawn from years of surviving hard choices. He gathered what he could nearby: extra clothing, a blanket from his pack, placing them within reach. He waited, watching the mother and child, knowing that whatever happened next would change more than the course of the night. Some decisions did not need justification. They simply needed to be carried through. Step by careful step, the mother's breathing became shallow to the point of stillness, each breath separated by long, uncertain pauses. The rise of her chest was barely visible now, more suggested than seen. Frost gathered along the edges of her fur, where warmth had already begun to fade. The injuries along her side no longer bled. They had given all they were going to take. The infant sensed the change before the man did. Its body stiffened, and it lifted its head, pressing its face against the mother's neck as if searching for reassurance. A soft sound escaped its throat, higher this time, trembling. The mother responded with a slight movement, her fingers curling weakly into the infant's fur. It was a small gesture, but deliberate, made with the last of her strength. Her eyes shifted, unfocused but open, and for a moment they settled on the man. There was no warning in them, no challenge. If anything, there was recognition. He did not know how, but he felt seen. The look held for a few seconds longer than he expected, then faded as her gaze drifted away. The infant pressed closer, climbing partially onto her chest, refusing to accept the stillness that was creeping in. It nudged her, then froze when her body did not respond. The forest remained silent, as though sound itself had stepped back to make room for what was happening. The final breath came quietly. There was no struggle, no sudden movement. The mother's body relaxed, weight settling fully into the frozen ground. The protection she had maintained until the end slipped away, not through choice, but because there was nothing left to give. The infant let out a sound that did not carry far but cut deep. It stayed where it was, waiting for a response that did not come. The man remained still, understanding that this moment did not belong to him. Time passed without measure. The cold deepened. Eventually, the truth settled in, heavy and undeniable. The mother was gone. What remained was a life that did not yet understand loss, clinging to warmth that was already fading. And standing a few steps away, the man knew that what happened next would define everything that followed. Night was falling when he finally moved. The forest had grown darker, shadows stretching longer, blending the trees into a near impenetrable wall. The man bent carefully, keeping his movements slow and deliberate, and lifted the infant from the mother's chest. The small body was surprisingly heavy for its size, muscles tense and fingers gripping as though refusing to let go. Every motion was measured to avoid startling the baby, to avoid sending it into panic. The infant's eyes met his, wide with fear and confusion. Its small head pressed against his chest, searching for the warmth it had lost. Every step he took toward the clearing's edge was careful. Every snap of a twig underfoot felt magnified. The baby tightened its hold, a silent refusal to accept separation. It clawed lightly, not in anger, but in desperation, trying to pull itself back toward the still figure on the frozen ground. The man felt the weight of the moment pressing on him almost as much as the physical burden. He could not simply carry this life away and pretend the mother had not existed. The loss was tangible, pressing in every nerve. The cold air bit at his face and hands. Frost had already formed along the edges of the mother's fur and on the forest floor. Snow had begun to dust the clearing. The man moved methodically, keeping the infant as close as possible without crushing it, supporting its small back with one arm while the other held a blanket over its fragile body. Every step was deliberate, every movement calculated to minimize disturbance. He noticed how the infant reacted to each shift of his balance, each tiny adjustment. It was alert, aware, protective even. Despite the weakness of its mother, the baby carried an instinctive awareness that seemed far beyond its size. It was clinging not just to warmth, but to the memory of her presence, an unspoken understanding of what had been lost. By the time he reached a sheltered area nearby, the infant's resistance had not waned, though it had grown slightly calmer. He set the baby down gently, wrapping it in the blanket to provide warmth. He stayed close, keeping watch as the small figure adjusted to its new surroundings, unsure if trust could be formed in this fragile, quiet moment. Outside, the night deepened, but inside that small circle of light and warmth, life continued. The man understood that he had been entrusted with a responsibility far heavier than he had imagined. The infant's survival now depended entirely on him. The man stayed with the infant as darkness settled fully over the forest. The trees loomed like silent sentinels, and the wind whispered through their branches. But within the small circle of shelter he had managed to create, there was a fragile sense of safety. The infant remained pressed against the blanket he had wrapped around it, small hands gripping tightly at the edges, hesitant to relax entirely. It was alert, watching every movement he made, aware of every sound, every shadow. He did not speak. Words were unnecessary, even unwelcome. The infant did not understand them, and the presence of any sound risked breaking the fragile calm. Instead, he moved slowly, checking the blanket, adjusting its position, and keeping his body between the small creature and the open forest. The night was unforgiving, cold seeping even through layers of clothing, but he remained steady. One misstep could startle the infant or draw unwanted attention from the unseen creatures of the forest. It was in these quiet moments that he realized the gravity of what he had stumbled upon. The world outside the forest would never comprehend this. People would not understand the depth of devotion, the bond that refused to be broken, the instinct that drove a newborn to cling to the dying. He also knew that if this encounter were discovered, the infant would not survive, not from malice, but from misunderstanding, from fear. Some truths were meant to remain hidden, and some lives were protected only by secrecy. He let the night stretch on, measuring time in the slow rise and fall of the infant's chest. The creature's soft sounds, tiny shifts, and occasional glances toward him spoke volumes without a word. He responded with care, with patience, with the steady hands and calm presence that experience had taught him. In this quiet, the man understood what responsibility meant, not heroism, not glory, but a careful, unwavering attention to life, and an acceptance that some parts of the world were never meant to be shared. The infant slept lightly for short periods, always returning to the warmth of the man's presence. And through it all, the forest remained silent, the darkness thick around them, holding its breath as the two survived a night that neither would forget. In that night, he became the guardian of a bond that the rest of the world could not, and would not, ever see. By the first light of dawn, the man knew it was time. The forest had begun to glow with muted shades of morning, the way sunlight filters through frost and mist. He carefully lifted the infant once more, feeling the small body tense, pressing instinctively against him. The creature's eyes, wide and searching, flicked toward the shadows where the mother had fallen the night before. Though the body was gone, the memory of warmth and protection lingered, and the infant's hesitation reflected a grief that was more than instinct, was understanding. He moved slowly through the clearing, toward a part of the forest he had discovered years earlier. a place hidden from the paths humans might take. Moss covered the ground, fallen branches created natural barriers, and the trees were spaced in a way that allowed light in without revealing the space to the outside world. It was here that he would leave the infant, where others like it could find safety, where it could belong without fear. As he approached, shapes began to emerge in the trees. Figures moved quietly, large and covered in dark fur, blending seamlessly with the shadows. They did not call, they did not make noise, yet their presence was unmistakable. The infant stiffened, gripping tighter for a moment before hesitating, then slowly easing its hold, recognizing the company that had arrived. The man set the infant down gently. It did not rush forward, did not leap immediately into the unknown. It paused, looking back once, a glance that held a lifetime of unspoken understanding. The figures in the shadows watched silently, and after a brief hesitation, the infant moved toward them, merging into the group with a hesitant step. It was careful, aware, and profoundly connected to the world it was returning to. He remained still, watching until the last movement disappeared into the forest. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of frost and pine. The clearing was empty once more, except for the traces of the mother and the brief passage of the infant. No words were spoken, no acknowledgments exchanged. The forest had witnessed a goodbye that no one else would see. The man finally exhaled, the weight of the night pressing against him. He turned slowly and began the walk back, knowing that the moment he had witnessed would remain with him forever. Some stories are not meant for the world. They exist only in the memory of those who bore witness. And this one, above all, was his to carry. Years passed before the man spoke of that night. He had carried the memory quietly, tucked away like a fragile relic. Life in the forest continued around him, unchanged in its rhythms, but the memory remained vivid. He told the story now not for attention, nor for disbelief or proof, but because it mattered that someone knew the truth of what he had witnessed. The infant had survived, returned to its own, and the mother's sacrifice remained unbroken. In the quiet of that forest, he had seen love and devotion that transcended species, instinct that mirrored the deepest human emotions. It had left a mark on him he could not erase. He explained how some moments are too delicate for the world, how certain truths must remain hidden to protect those who cannot protect themselves. And though he had remained silent for years, the memory never faded, never lost its weight. In the end, he wanted the world to understand one thing: love is not limited to humanity. Grief, care, and devotion exist in forms beyond words, beyond recognition, and sometimes only in those who bear witness. The story he finally shared was not meant to amaze or to entertain. It was meant to honor what he had seen and to remind others that even in the wildest, most hidden corners of the world, life and love persist against all odds. Some moments change a person forever, and some encounters leave marks that can never fade. This was one of those moments.